Hey guys, this is the connective tissue video to give you some notes on what's going on with connective tissue, which is by far the most diverse type of tissue that we're going to take a look at. And I took this video at the Museum of Science when we went to go see the Body Worlds exhibit on a field trip. And I thought I'd start with this because it's kind of a cool view from inside one of the blood vessels with all sorts of red blood cells and white blood cells going around there. You can also see the barrier of the actual blood vessels, which should be aligned with simple squamous cells. So let's take a look and let's go on to the next slide. So we have four types of tissue, just to remind us where we're at and everything. We've talked about epithelial tissue. This is going to talk about connective tissue, which very broadly provides support for the body. And of course, muscle and nervous tissue, which you can find more about in those videos. So this picture I thought we'd start with since we just saw the blood vessel. This would be the barriers of an artery and the barrier of a vein. So you can see that the inside is layered with this endothelial tissue, epithelial tissue, excuse me, endothelium, or this epithelial tissue called endothelium. And then you have this quick layer of connective tissue followed by smooth muscle, followed by another layer of connective tissue. So we see this connective tissue all over the body. Sometimes it is in really thin layers here that's just connecting the epithelial to the muscle, and sometimes it's beyond that to the next layer up, which would be to the next more loosely packed connective tissue. So that's loose connective tissue. We'll see what that is in a second. This is another picture to show you how complicated that is. I guess I should probably point out that the artery here is much thicker than and much more elastic, you can see in all those folds, than the vein, because it needs to hold that high pressure and needs to be able to change shape. Okay. So connective tissue varies in appearance and function throughout the body, but never exposed to the outside. So if you have your connective tissue on the outside of your body, something's gone terribly wrong. And one of the reasons is that it's full of our sensory receptors, our nerves, and our blood vessels. Our blood vessels are all throughout there, so you know that it's exposed if it starts bleeding, is one way of thinking about it. And we can see that this is different than epithelial tissue, where only 10% of the cancers are occurring on this kind of connective tissue. Here are some broad functions of the connective tissue, and I think this speaks to the different kinds of connective tissue that you have in your body. So it establishes a structural framework. That's like your bones and your cartilage. Those are the things that are there. It transports fluids and dissolved materials. So that would be like your blood and your lymph. It's going to be taking things all throughout your body there. Those are also connective tissue, even though that seems very, very different than bones, and we'll talk about that in a second too. It protects your delicate organs, that's like your adipose tissue, your fat cells are there to make sure that happens, and it supports the surrounding interconnecting types of tissue. So that's like the different types of loose connective tissue that we have, like areolar tissue or reticular loose connective tissue. Stores energy reserves, especially in the forms of triglyceride. That would be in your fats as well. Defense against body from foreign invaders. That's our immune system, right? Those are the white blood cells that we'd find in there too. So it's a pretty diverse group of sets of tissues. And I couldn't resist putting this little picture in just to remind you from when you took biology what a triglyceride is. So this is on the macromolecule level. We see all these long carbon chains. Each one of these kinks is a carbon. That's a bond between two carbons. And this is a triglyceride. It's got 3 of these long carbon chains or fatty acids, 3 fatty acids with this on the end of it, and bonded to a glycerol molecule. So triglycerol or triglyceride is what we normally think about when we think about fat. So if you're eating dinner, or you're eating and you're looking at the fat content of something, this is what we're really looking at, is that the content of triglycerides is kind of one way to think about that. This would be a saturated fatty acid because all of these have single bonds between them. An unsaturated would have a double bond somewhere, and that would mean that it would be a little bit healthier because it takes up a little bit more room because of a kink in the chain. Sorry, off topic a little bit, but I couldn't resist going back to biology for you guys. So some basic features of connective tissue, back on topic. They are going to have all sorts of specialized cells. We're going to see a really wide range of cells. The main fibers that we're focusing on, and when I say fibers, I mean like protein chains, are elastin and collagen. So elastin is going to be the one that, like the name suggests, is very elastic and stretchy, and collagen is much more rigid and more structural. There are fluids. The main thing about connective tissue I need to make sure you know is that there is this extracellular matrix. So the extracellular matrix is the stuff that's all around, that's outside of the cells, and that's going to play a really important role for connective tissue. And then the ground substance is like the gel, mostly water-like substance that's holding all of these other things in there. So the matrix, like I said, or ECM, extracellular matrix, are the combination of all the fibers and the ground substance where that's containing the cells. And so there are fewer cells and more extracellular material than the epithelial, just in the ratio of those things. So three main types of connective tissue. So this will be the first way we're going to break it down. There's connective tissue proper, fluid connective tissue, and supportive connective tissue. And I bet, given some of the ideas that I've already previewed, I bet you can kind of guess, especially maybe the fluid one, I bet you can guess which one that is. And then supportive is what's going to support your body to hold you upright. So that's going to be, your bones and your cartilage. So let's break them down. Connective tissue proper. The many types of cells here with this and fibers, that's that elastin and collagen, with this syrupy ground substance. And this is where, like, when you say your cells are, when you're dehydrated or you're retaining water, you're usually doing that in that syrupy ground substance. So it's really dynamic in what it can do. So the first one is this loose connective tissue, and I think actually this is probably the one you feel like will have the least experience with directly in this connective tissue. But those are the areolar, the adipose, and the reticular. So the areolar are like the loose connective tissue that's a combination of elastin and collagen fibers that connects things. Think of like underneath your skin. After you get down below the epidermis, you'd have areolar connective tissue. Adipose is a fancy word for fat, or the fat tissue. So we'll take a look at that. So it's going to store, it's going to do all sorts of things. It helps with thermoregulation, it helps with protection, it helps with storing energy, among other things that it does, but it's going to have a lot of those lipids in there. And our reticular connective fluid is going to be the stuff that's like mostly collagen fibers. It gives a lot of like structural support for different things. Dense is densely packed. It's like tendons and ligament, and this is one you've seen before, the sclera. You remember? Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, or don't fire until you see the sclera. The fibroblast is the main cell we're looking at here, and that's the one that's going to produce the collagen and elastin fibers. Okay, fluid connective tissue. So this is the watery-ish matrix. The blood is in the cardiovascular system. We'll talk more about that. And the lymph for the lymphatic system, which are like your white blood cells and all the fluid that's in the lymph. The lymph is the fluid containing those cells. Supporting connective tissue is less diverse cells. The matrix with densely packed fibers. Okay, so that would be your cartilage, and there are three types of cartilage: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline would be like the tip of your nose. It's also the part that connects your ribs to your sternum. It's like the glass-like substance. Your elastic would be like your ears and your larynx, and then your fibrocartilage is like shock absorbers right down the middle of your back. So you get a sense of that. Bone, solid crystalline, we have three types of bone cells. Osteocytes are the main type we're going to talk about. Blasts build cells, and clasts tear it down. We'll talk about that more. Nice overview picture to give you a sense of exactly what where we're going with this. And you can see that breaks down the different types we've just mentioned in a nice visual for you, and go from there. This is where I mentioned, I said that we get this diverse range of cells, and this is like an embryonic origin of where we're talking about, where the stem cells could differentiate into where almost all of them are starting from the same spot. So like all of these things are coming from the same spot to produce these subclasses or different kind of things. This hematopoietic stem cells are going to producing your blood. So we've seen a table like this before. It gives you a very nice overview of all the kind of things that you should see. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's kind of more of a summative kind of thing. You can see the functions. If you want to learn, go ahead and read through this. I'm certainly not going to read it to you. You can pause and take a closer look. Bone to cartilage. I thought this was just interesting. Like, we're going to talk more about this more later on, but like the idea of like where what's going on with this, like the vascularity, how much blood goes to these things. The cartilage doesn't get any, but as opposed to the nutrients in the blood have to seep through the lacuna, and the bones are full of blood. It's kind of cool to think about that, and like what they're made of. The elastin is much more in the collagen, but this is primarily collagen fibers, and that explains like the rigidity to it. Right, the cartilage is much more flexible. right, so let's go through connective tissue proper, some pictures. So this you'll see on the slides. You can see the different things that are in here. This is visual, nice visual of like collagen fibers are the thicker ones here, and the elastin ones are the thinner ones. So you can see, get a sense of exactly the elastic fiber or elastin, and that gives you, I think, that helps me kind of mentally visualize like which ones are more rigid and which ones are more flexible. And the fibroblasts are the cells that are kind of joined in there, but you can see there are all sorts of mast cells, lymphocytes, all sorts of other cells in the mix. Adipose, fat cells are in there too, but it's all this ground substance in the background. It's all about that extracellular matrix, and that's going to be seen here in our areolar connective tissue. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but this is adipose tissue. These are the storage of fat cells. So you can see that they're so big and they're so packed that the nuclei are pushed to the side. And I thought this would be interesting, again, from the Museum of Science field trip, where you can see the difference in someone who doesn't have a lot of fat underneath their skin versus someone who's obese and the layers of fat that are there. So these are plastinated humans who donated their bodies to science. So you can see what it really looks like. Reticular cartilage, it's just much more collagen to give more of a definitive structure. Dense, regular connective tissue. So you get this idea. This is like when we're talking about tendons and ligaments, and then sclera, like we said before too. But the cool part about this is, or the interesting part is, it's so dense and it's so like stretchy and elastic that it doesn't have a lot of blood vessels there. So if you get a tear in a ligament or a tendon or something, it takes a long time to heal because it doesn't have a whole lot of blood supply there. So you can get the idea. Okay, dense, irregular connective tissue. There are more elastin fibers in here than in the collagen ones, and still dense, elastic connective tissue. So we can see this would be the stuff that we started with. We're seeing that this is like the aorta, which has to be able to expand and contract. So the more elastic fibers there, the more stretchy it is. Fluid connective tissue. So blood, the main thing that we're going to talk about. Lymph is also considered this fluid one, but there are components of the blood, which is the plasma, then the formed elements. And the formed elements are like the cells, right? The erythrocytes, which you know are red blood cells. The leukocytes. Leuko means white, of course. Erythro means red, and cyte means cell. And then the thrombocytes, which are the platelets, which are in charge of clotting. The hematocrit is interesting because I think it can talk about how healthy you are. This is a visual that shows the hematocrit is the amount of red blood cells in your blood. So if you let your blood sit, if you ever donated blood, you might notice that it starts to separate the plasma and the white blood cells and platelets or thrombocytes compared to the red blood cells. Red blood cell content is generally higher in males than females. It's more like 40 to 50% in males and 35 to 40, don't quote me on the numbers, but ballpark for females, which is interesting, and just one of those biological sex differences. We can talk more about as we get into blood later. So this is what you'd see under a slide. If you look at blood under a slide, you can see the red blood cells, which are enucleated. They have no nucleus. They've gotten rid of that. The small thrombocytes, and then the leukocytes. So you see a range of different cells that are in there. And the roles of all those things. Red blood cells, they get rid of the nucleus so they have more room to carry the stuff that they want to do. They are like the oxygen bus. They carry stuff around. They also get rid of your carbon dioxide too. And the white blood cells, there's a whole range of white blood cells that we'll talk more about in the immune system. Supporting connective tissues, we already mentioned this hyaline cartilage is connecting your ribs to your sternum there. It's also the stuff that you'd find at the end of your nose. And I mentioned the chondrocyte is the cell inside of this lacuna that's kind of a little nested space there. This is the elastic, and so that's going to be in your ear. It's much more flexible. And then this is the fibrocartilage, the shock absorbers, which are, of course, the parts in between your vertebrae. Your intervertebral discs. If you were to slip a disc, it means that that piece of cartilage is protruding, which can pinch a nerve and can be very painful. A compact bone is one of our two types, compact, and a compact bone is you're going to see this one, these concentric circles to give it strength. We'll talk more about that when we get to bone, but you have the compact or loose in there. So there are specialized bone cells. We have osteoblasts, which are going to be building the cells and secreting the matrix, a lot of collagen in that matrix, of course, a lot of calcium and phosphate in there, the combination of those things. In the ground substance, it's going to be dissolved in there. The osteoclasts are where you absorb bone and releasing calcium into the blood. We talked about feedback loops. The regulation of calcium in the blood is maintained by your osteoblasts and osteoclasts, constantly absorbing, reabsorbing blood or not. Okay. And osteocytes are mature blood cells. Okay. Connective tissues, I'm going to go through these lab sides quickly because I think you can see these when we look at them under the microscope, but you get a sense of the areolar connective tissue. You can see the fibers in there. Adipose connective tissue, loose reticular connective tissue. Again, there's the more collagen in there. It's going to be more of a framework for stuff for you. You can see those collagen fibers. Dense regular connective tissue and then you can see that this is our dense. You can see the tendon, the waviness of the tendon with not a lot of blood vessels, and dense regular connective tissue, and so irregular connective tissue. And you can tell right away it's much more irregular in terms of its shape. Okay, the dense elastic connective tissue, this would be like the aorta. You saw that before when we started the video here. We can see how it's going to be more stretchy here. It's got more elastin in there so that it can really stretch out and expand. Okay, hyaline cartilage, just to check yourself, this should be the stuff that we're finding in our nose or connecting your ribs. It's like a glass-like substance that's there. This is found in the trachea, this picture here. You can see the chondrocytes in their own little individual lacunas, but it's all about that extracellular matrix, the stuff outside of it. Fibrocartilage, again, that's going to be in the shock absorbers for your intervertebral discs. Okay, the cells with the lacunas around them. We'll see that again. Elastic cartilage is your ear, is one example of that. More elastin fibers. Compact bone here. You can see the compact bone with the osteons, or these concentric rings, or also known as the Haversian system. The cells are interesting here. They're actually in these little shaded areas. So this is not a cell, it's the center of that. So that's the Haversian canal. And our blood, of course, we saw this a little bit. This is very similar, I think, to what we saw before. You see the red blood cells in there. Red blood cells in there all over the place, with the white blood cell there, with the giant purple nucleus, and then you can see the thrombocytes, or the platelets, floating around, and the particulates there. So you might actually be able to spot a few different types of white blood cells, and we haven't distinguished between those yet, but we will. And that's it. So just to give you an overview again, where we're at, this is the connective tissue. We just summarized that. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening.